We finally have the first look at Shadowverse Worlds Beyond's second set, Infinity Evolved. Alongside the trailer showcase, we actually got some awesome legendary card reveals for a good chunk of classes. We haven't gotten everything, but I think what we've seen so far has already shown that it's going to have a great impact on what we know from the set 1 meta. We're kicking it off with Havencraft with Wilbert Desolate Paladin, a 6-cost 4/6 with Ward, and then last words, summon 2 copies of Holy Cavalier. And then on Evolve, you gain the crest Wilbert Desolate Paladin. Whenever an allied follower with Ward enters the field, give it +1/+2. These kind of permanent crests are something that have been incredibly valuable. You see it whenever you play Aria with Forest, the fact that they all get the fairies that all gain a Storm. Now we're getting into a position where Havencraft is kind of rewarded for playing its more defensive style by just innately getting a stat buff to Warders. It means that if you even just play something like a Bellringer, well, then you're going to be able to have it +1/+2 now to actually be able to contest some stats. Granted, at 6 costs, that's not phenomenal, but it is something, especially when you consider that the Holy Cavaliers themselves, they are 1/2s, but by the time they come in alongside Wilbert's ability, they get +1/+2. Thus turning them into 2/4s, and the fact that you can play this on 6 is great for how you go off the rest of the game. It'll be able to boost up Jeanne because she innately has Ward, and the deck just innately plays a lot of things like this. It's a kind of a stray away from a lot of the amulet stuff. A lot of the amulet cards currently in Havencraft don't really innately have Ward, but it's just a good card. It's decent stats on its own right, and it makes your already decent defensive cards that we already exist more viable. So I'm interested to see what more cards Infinity Evolve kind of leans into to be able to provide us with more value with this crest. Moving on over to Abysscraft, and we have Ginsetsu and Yuzuki, Twin Calamities, a 9-cost 5/9 fanfare. Select a mode. You either get to summon 4 copies of One-Tailed Fox, or you get to destroy 4 random enemies and restore 4 to your leader. So incredibly powerful. Do you need to make a comeback turn? Fantastic. Then we'll go ahead and restore 4, as well as effectively board wipe our opponent. Are we ahead? Does the opponent have nothing going on? Is it an empty board? Well, then we'll be able to summon 4 copies of One-Tailed Fox. This is very much similar in tone to the notion of like how Orcus is great at any point in the game. If your opponent has an open board state, then you can just go ahead and apply a great board for 1 card, which is massive. Are you behind? Well, then it allows you to come back from being behind and being in a good position. Especially when you consider that the One-Tailed Foxes themselves are 2-cost 2/3s with Rush, Ward, and then last words, give a random allied Ginsetsu and Yuzuki on the field +1/+0, effectively turning your 9-cost into a 9/9 by the time all of the One-Tailed Foxes are gone. This is very similar to kind of what Amalia does for Swordcraft, where for 1 card, you're getting out a massive board, and then if your opponent can't deal with it, they're kind of in really big trouble. I will say, obviously, Amalia has this the benefit that anything you play afterwards still gets the benefit of having Ward, thus protecting her, and sometimes that can lead to some wins. But in Abysscraft, this is huge, right? We've seen Abysscraft kind of rise up from a lesser used deck to something that can actually consistently hold on its own, and I think a massive top end card like this definitely helps lean into it, especially when you combo it with, like, on turn 8 you can go like Cerberus. Your opponent has to deal with that, and then once they spend a lot of resources dealing with that, then you can just go Ginsetsu and Yuzuki and be able to be very annoying on that front. So awesome card. I'm going to be doing a breakdown of all the different archetypes, strategies, and cards coming out with set 2, so if you guys want to keep up with that, subscribe button down below would be much appreciated. Shifting on over to Dragoncraft, and I love Dragoncraft reveals because I as much as it's been hard to play Dragoncraft in set 1, I want any excuse to be able to go back, as it is my favorite class. We have Phaline, Whitefrost, Bloom, a 2-cost 2/2, so early game play. Fanfare, if you're in overflow, add a Whitefrost Whisper to your hand. We'll go ahead and check that in a second. But innately has Bane, which is awesome, a 2-cost 2/2 with Bane. You can play it out early if you just need a body. Very often the deck will kind of require that. But if you are in the late game, now on Evo, you're dealing 1 damage to all enemy followers, and then on Evo, you'll be able to attack into something, Bane, and get out of the way. I will say, once you're in the late game, being able to have removal isn't the hardest thing for Dragon, just because you have so many cards that just innately have removal on that top end. But just having something cheap, cost 2, and then enables you to be able to go into something else afterwards, like a Garyu if need be, is really impactful. But the big thing here is the Whitefrost Whisper. So it is a 3-cost spell. Select a mode to activate. You can either destroy all damage enemy followers, which of course Phaline will go ahead and ping them all for 1 if you evo them, so effectively turning it into a 2-card board wipe for 5, which is really great, off of 1 card, mind you, which is very important. Alternatively, we can increase the cost of all cards in your opponent's hand by 1 until the end of the turn, and I can't understate how impactful an effect like this is. You now are in a position where you can just prevent your opponent from being able to Kakaitis 3 turns back to back to back, right? Assuming you get all 3 of your failings, but it's something that can throw your opponent off curve. Especially since we're in Dragon, we can play this in a position where we're at 9 or 10 versus our opponent's 7 or 8, and then it's just super impactful. Are you playing against Abysscraft and you're just in a bad position if they drop down Cerberus? Go ahead and White Frost. Or same thing with Olivia. Go ahead and Cerberus. For Portalcraft, do you not want them to draw Gurren Lagann? Well, then you can go ahead, play out White Frost Whisper, and prevent them from being able to play it unless they have the additional play point. That is kind of one way that decks will be able to get around this. But incredibly impactful card in terms of just throwing decks off curve, especially for a deck that will sometimes need to just draw out a turn or 2 extra to be able to get to the things it wants to do. At 3, there's a couple of plays that we have available at 7 or below. If you're trying to be more aggressive, obviously you can still do things like play out the Fortes or whatever like that. It does lock you out of being able to do something like a Garyu, which can hurt. But I mean, if you have the play point, technically you could do that as well. But there are still some great options in terms of that 7 or lower, especially considering the things that we haven't even seen yet. So this is exciting. This is going to be annoying. This is going to tilt a lot of people if they get in a world where they need a specific play to be able to make everything happen and they just can't get there. But it is extremely punishing for those decks that need all 10 play points to be able to close out the game. All right, moving on to Runecraft, we have Lantham, Anathema of Idacity, a 8-cost 5/5, so very expensive. However, it has Aura, which is nice, makes it a little bit harder for our opponent to have to deal with it. And then last words, Earthright for 2, you get to summon an additional copy of her. And then on Super Evo, you get to select 2 enemy followers on the field and destroy them. The select 2 enemies and destroy is very strong. We've seen that ability in Portalcraft, shifting over to Runecraft, which is also a deck that will often want to be defensive, is great. And then now we finally have our Earthright payoff. Earthright as a deck is a deck that can do fine, but you've always had to play a little bit of middle ground between the Earthright stuff and the spell boost stuff to still be able to declimb and kind of get those late game wins. But now we finally have a form of payoff now where you just have a 5/5 that your opponent will effectively never be able to get rid of. There's nothing really that's given us a benefit for having a lot of Earth Sigils. Oftentimes it's just, hey, just make sure you have the 3 or 4 required for the couple of abilities that allow you to do things like do a mini board wipe or be able to Super Evo for free. Now we have a real payoff in the terms of this is just a body that I will be able to recur forever unless you drain me out of all of my Earth Sigils, which can be very annoying. So very solid card. It's kind of hard to see where it fits in because it doesn't necessarily close the game in itself, and it doesn't do anything on the board unless you actually Super Evo it. But then afterwards, your opponent will just never have to deal with it. So how does that fit in? I think you can be in a fine spot. We've seen that Dirt Rune can push damage earlier, and so just having kind of a 5/5 that sticks around might just be enough to be able to kind of close out the game. I'll have to see what the rest of the package is. Hopefully this comes with a little bit more additional Earthright support, but I'm excited that we're able to expand the different playstyles that the different classes have available to them. Moving on to Sword, and we have Gildaria, Anathema of Peace, Fanfare, Rally 20, Super Evolve this follower. Rally is a new keyword that just tracks how many followers you have played on your side of the field. So effectively, to get Gildaria's Fanfare ability, you just need to have played 20 bodies before she comes down. Whenever another ally follower enters the field, deal 1 damage to all enemy followers. That's great in some Swordcraft. Lots of cards produce 2 or 3 bodies at a time. So if you're in a position where you have Gildaria, she survives a turn, and you're able to just throw stuff down, and now your opponent's in a position where they really have to deal against Gildaria, or they'll just never have a board. And then effectively, whenever this follower evolves, which you'll get the free Super Evo if you're able to meet the Rally 20, you get to summon 2 copies of Steelcloud Knight and give them Rush. Sick. We love having Steelcloud Knights. Effectively, on Super Evo, you get yourself a 7/7. You're going to be able to get 2 Steelcloud Knights. You're going to ping the board for 2, and then if you need to attack into things, you can. And then Gildaria is already Super Evo'd, so you can get that 7 damage in through for that additional ping and that additional board clear. So very annoying. Being at 6 is also kind of really funny. Now you're in a funny position where, like, if you're in the late game, you can, for 10 play points, you can go into Emilia, be able to draw your 2 cards, get your 2 play points back, play down Gildaria. Gildaria will go ahead and Super Evo. You get your stuff, and then you can, like, Super Evo Emilia and then give everything barrier as well, which could be super annoying. So odds are you're not playing this on curve because Rally 20 by turn 6 is kind of crazy. But there are a good number of plays that you can make with Gildaria for 4 that'll be able to allow you to ping the board additionally, being able to get down more stuff, make it really annoying for your opponent. So neat card. I don't know where it slots in specifically, but anything in terms of mid-range sword, if you just need that additional board control, the free body, obviously a 7/7 Super Evo is nice as well, is nice for the deck. And finally, to close it off, we have Odin Twilight Fate, a neutral 7-cost 4/2 Fanfare. Select an enemy card on the field and banish it, and it just has Storm. This is going to see usage in probably quite a few decks. Anything that's trying to be aggressive, any decks that don't have a form of closer is very important, right? Like, I'm not saying you're going to play this in Rune, right? But Rune sometimes runs into situations where if you run out of super evos, you actually have 0 ways to be able to burst damage onto your opponent. You just have to hope that you can establish some kind of board that they can't deal with afterwards, because all of your direct damage, things that get stormed, so on and so forth, are tied to having a super evo. So there's a world in which maybe you include an Odin to be able to, 1, clear away their biggest thing, so it's just clean removal, but 2, having an additional form of 4 damage, assuming you have like no more evos left, or even just a regular evo being able to deal for 6, and then in any other deck that can like more conservatively hold on to their super evos, now you're dealing like 7. Obviously, we've seen aggro and Storm Dragon be a thing. This slots into this perfectly fine. Get rid of your biggest thing, storm in for some damage, not having to use any evo points. That's also very sick. So I can see this card slot in a ton of decks. And if you're leaning into an aggressive strategy, the ability to be able to remove something off the board, especially a Banish. Banish is pretty nice. On top of just being able to deal direct face damage is fantastic. These new cards have me extremely jazzed for Shadowverse's second release, just because the card pool is pretty limited in terms of allowing you to be able to vary your gameplay in terms of what certain class uses, and some classes legitimately only have 1 archetype. So the fact that we can expand on that, we're getting new Earthright stuff. Havencraft is able to expand beyond the amulet stuff. We've got tools like Odin and stuff like that for additional aggressive decks. I think it's very exciting, and I'm looking forward to the future reveals. So with that said, I'll catch you guys on the next one.